Are we on the brink of World War III? I get that question a lot. If you don't know who I am, my name is Gerdes. I'm just a professor who tries to provide context in the war in Ukraine. And if you're not familiar with me, consider subscribing. I do updates on Ukraine every day. Now, let me tell you what I did here. I'm comparing first all the global conflicts in 2025. And then I look at all the global conflicts in 1938 and 1939 before World War II officially kicked off. And then we're comparing and contrasting what's going on there in order to try to provide an answer. So let's work our way through this. So let's talk about military conflicts in May right now of 2025. So we have India and Pakistan. Mercifully, this was a very short war. It only took a couple weeks and it was over, but there's still tensions there. It's just simmering below the surface. Then we have Israel and Palestine. That one's been going on for decades, centuries even, right? I mean, the Israelis have been at odds with the peoples there even when it wasn't Israel. And so, yeah, that's going to continue to fester. It's going to continue to boil. But Israel, Palestine with Gaza, it's still pretty hot. Israel and Lebanon, well, that goes hot and cool periodically, but it's something that I would keep my eye on. Israel and Syria. Now that's going to change. That's just changed. Like if we look at what's just happened with the Trump administration visiting to Saudi Arabia and Syria, and it's really shifted the global parameters where Russia used to have a great influence in Syria and Iran and Syria. And so now it's Saudi and Syria rather than Iran and Syria. And so something has shifted there, and that's a positive thing, I think, but you got to be careful and watch the region. Yemen is another area that you'd want to keep your eye on. And again, Yemenis are, the Houthis are being they're attacking shipping, and the U.S. has been striking the Yemenis, but it's really a proxy war between the U.S. and Iran. Iran is supporting the Yemeni strikes. Ukraine and Russia, this is the one to watch. This is the one that could turn into World War III most easily, in my estimation. So if this spilled out into broader Europe, that would trigger NATO, Article 5, and then we'd be into a World War III kind of scenario. We're not there. So let's just see what could cause it to be or not be. Iran's a bad actor in the region, and Iran wants to destroy Israel, and Iran is buddy-buddy with Russia, and yeah, I mean, you know how your parents told you, like, don't hang out with certain people because the people that you hang out are the people you're like? Well, there's Russia, and then there's Iran, and then China, which is also saber-rattling over Taiwan, and then there's North Korea. These are all bad actors. It's very parallel to an axis in the 1930s. Okay, Sudan's experiencing violence. The Congo is experiencing violence. In fact, in the Middle East and North Africa, you have 45 different armed conflicts going on simultaneously. Now, there's very small or low scale compared to what's going on in Ukraine, but nonetheless. Okay. So that's what's happening in 2025. Now let's compare that with what was going on in 1938. So most people don't even think about the Spanish Civil War, but that was going on from 1936 to 1939. So that was ongoing at the time that World War II broke out. And I'm dating World War II from the time that the Germans invade Poland. Okay. Now I know that the Germans and Russia had already kind of carved up what they were going to do in a treaty, and so things were already going on, but that's where I'm dating it from. You also had the Second Sino-Japanese War that was going on from 1937 to 1945, so that was already happening in China. And then you had the Anschluss. This was a bloodless coup or takeover from Nazi Germany taking over Australia in a way that was just it happened, but it wasn't like nobody was. I don't think there was any violence involved in it. Then you had the Sudeten crisis, and this is where Germany was demanding the Sudetenland because there were these helpless Germans across the border that needed to be protected. And it's kind of sounding like what the Russians just did with Donbass, right? And that was in Czechoslovakia. And then you had the Munich agreement that came out of that. And this is bad. This was appeasement of a dictator who was just going to keep going because you appeased him. Then you had the Japanese border conflicts, and this was between the Soviet Union and Manchurian border, and it was small scale. Zhukov put that down. And then you had the Italian occupation of Albania and the early stages of that. And then even like most people forget, in Mexico nationalized its oil industry, and the like British and American companies were like, so all over the world there were these conflicts. So that was before World War II actually started. So let's talk about some of the similarities and connections here. So rising geopolitical tensions and great power rivalries. The world was polarized between Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, and allies, or those that would become allies later, like Britain and France. Much of the rest of Europe that didn't want to be effective, that ultimately got absorbed into Germany, would have been in that group. The U.S. became an ally later on. The USSR, after Germany turned on the USSR. Now, in 2025, it looks like U.S. and NATO on one side, and Russia and potentially China and North Korea. Russia and North Korea currently, and potentially China on the other. We don't know. Maybe Iran would be in that. And so the connection here is there's great power competition. They're testing boundaries and seeing how far they can push. And that's because they're authoritarians. And that's a second big point. Authoritarian expansionism is like in the 1930s, it was Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, imperial Japan. I would also say in the USSR, you had this authoritarian expansionism, even if they were on the Allied side. And the League of Nations couldn't really do anything to stop it. 2025, you see Ukraine as a big flashpoint, where Russia, an authoritarian state, is going over the borders into Ukraine as if they have any right to do so, and the rest of the world isn't really standing up to it. China is being very assertive in the South China Sea. We're saber-rattling about Taiwan. Iran is fomenting unrest with the Houthis, with Hezbollah. Syria, and again, Syria, they're being pushed out of Syria, so are the Russians, and that's probably a very good thing. But the connection, again, between both eras is this authoritarian power, or authoritarian powers, that are exploiting the weaker neighbors around it. And they're doing that because the global government is weak. Okay. Now, you have, again, a same kind of scenario, multiple simultaneous conflicts. It wasn't just Germany. It wasn't just Germany and Japan. It wasn't just Germany, Japan, and Italy. All kinds of things were happening simultaneously in 1939. And in 2025, right now, Russia, Ukraine, India, Pakistan, Israel, Palestine, Israel, Lebanon, what's going on with the Houthis. I mean, all kinds of things are happening. Okay. There is also economic issues, economic strain. There's resource competition. In 1939, remember, the Great Depression was only within the last decade, and the Smoot-Hawley tariff wasn't helping it. Trade barriers were a problem. Sanctions right now we're doing the same kind of thing. Sanctions on Russia, trade wars, tariffs, supply chain disruptions. Like, these things are happening in a very, very similar way. It's uncanny, and it's kind of scary how these things are happening. Technological advancements on the battlefield. In 1939, it would have been tanks and aircraft, right? And that became war that we hadn't seen before, like the Blitzkrieg. Chemical weapons were kind of a holdover from World War I. We didn't have trench warfare. They broke through trench warfare with tanks, and they broke through with aircraft. Now it's drones, like it's cyber war, it's AI, and the drones have changed the battlefield forever. Like, I was talking about an article today where tank doctrine is shifting from tanks as a blitzkrieg to tanks as a come out, shoot, and then run away, right? Because of drones. Okay. Both periods saw huge technological leaps. Then there was the failure of diplomacy. In 1939, again, the League of Nations didn't really work out. The appeasement policies of the Munich Agreement, that fizzled. That was terrible. Right now, the United Nations have been just as weak. The bilateral talks have not worked out. And so we have weak international institutions stopping violations of the rule of international order. Okay, and then we have this ideological polarization. In 1939, it was fascism or communism against liberal democracy. That's That's how the decks were stacked. And in 2025, it's ideological divides of democracy versus authoritarianism, or nationalism versus globalism. And it's amplified on state-controlled media from Russia, or social media in the United States, or both, right? And so you see these ideological clashes, and it's very, very eerie. Okay, so what are the key differences? Because the similarities are overwhelming, but there are a couple of key differences. So first, 1939 was the start of that great global war. We're not there yet. We don't have a global war with combatants on both sides just lining up. Not yet. It could be, but right now what we see is a fractured landscape geopolitically with multiple regional conflicts that, if those regional conflicts were kind of sewn together in alliances, could be very, very bad. Okay, the alliances in 1939, they had clear Axis versus Allied blocks. We don't really have that except for maybe NATO. And NATO, it depends on if they're invaded. It's a defensive alliance. We do see blocks of like the U.S. and Israel. We see blocks of Russia and North Korea, and maybe Russia and Iran as a lighter block. And maybe even China could join that. And if those four got together, we'd be in World War III in a very short period of time, more than likely. Okay, technology and globalization, it's interconnected. So now, instead of like in my dad's era, my dad was a young kid going to movies and seeing little newsreels about World War II, right? So that's different than we can find out in real time what just happened hours ago. And then, but the biggest key that's different is nuclear deterrence. And this might be the thing that preserves us from it, or it might be the thing that plunges us into it, nuclear deterrence. It wasn't there at the time. And the only reason that Russia's been able to run over Ukraine is because they have nuclear weapons, and they can keep the rest of the balance of power kind of countries in Europe from running all over them because of the nuclear weapons. So that's the big difference. Okay, so are we on the brink of World War II or World War III? I'm not sure. I know that we have lots of similarities, but there are some differences, and the biggest are the alliance blocks. They haven't coalesced or formed, and nuclear deterrence. So you tell me what you think. Are we on the brink of World War III? I think 1939 and 1938 to 1939 give us some significant clues, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for your time. If you're not familiar again with me, please consider subscribing. I do videos on Ukraine every day. Thank you for your time, the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about the world that we live in.